My fellow Africans, brothers and sisters, today marks a pivotal moment in history, a moment of renewed hope, bold vision, and unyielding strength. We stand at the crossroads of transformation, not just for Africa, but for the world. The wind of change is sweeping across our continent as powerful forces come together with one singular purpose: to reclaim what is rightfully ours. For too long, Africa has been subjected to the whims of foreign powers. We have seen our land, our resources, and our sovereignty eroded by colonization, exploitation, and greed. But this is no longer the narrative we accept. This is no longer the story of Africa. It is time for us to write our own chapter. In an unexpected and groundbreaking move, we witnessed the alignment of forces that we did not anticipate. An alliance between the United States, led by former President Donald Trump, and South Africa, a proud and resilient nation with its own history of struggle. Together they join hands in an unprecedented effort to restore African land to its rightful owners, the people of Africa. This alliance does not come without its complexities, and it is important that we understand the implications, both immediate and long-term. But let me be clear, this is not a moment to be cautious or hesitant. This is a time to rise, to stand tall, and to embrace the opportunity to heal the wounds of the past. For centuries, Africa's land has been stolen, its resources exploited, and its people displaced. It is time to reverse this injustice. Donald Trump, a figure who has always advocated for bold, unconventional moves, recognizes the importance of a fair and just Africa. His decision to support South Africa's efforts is not just a political maneuver, it is a recognition of Africa's strength, its potential, and its rightful place on the global stage. South Africa, under the leadership of its government, has long been committed to the principle that land ownership is a fundamental right of its people. Yet the path to reclaiming that land has been fraught with challenges, opposition, systemic obstacles, and deep-rooted inequalities that continue to affect every aspect of life for millions of South Africans. But now, with this support, South Africa's fight for land justice takes on a new dimension. We must also recognize the deep symbolism of this partnership. For too long, Africa has been isolated, ignored, and underestimated by the global community. But now, we are no longer passive participants in global affairs. We are asserting our sovereignty, reclaiming our resources, and reclaiming our future. The forces of change are no longer on the outside looking in. We, the African people, are the architects of our destiny. I know some may be skeptical of this new alliance, some may question the motives behind such a move, but we must remember that this moment is not about who we work with, but about what we achieve together. The truth is, we must look beyond the past and look towards the future where African nations are empowered to govern their own lands, shape their own policies, and harness their own resources for the benefit of their people. This is not the time for division. This is not the time for doubt. It is the time for action, for unity, and for progress. The land of Africa belongs to its people. Our ancestors fought and died for this land. We will not allow it to be taken from us any longer. With this new alliance, we now have an opportunity to correct the injustices of the past, to make Africa a continent of prosperity, self-determination, and dignity. Let us stand together as one and embrace this moment with courage and determination. The future of Africa is bright, and we will claim it with pride, with strength, and with unity. Thank you. This historic partnership between former President Donald Trump and South Africa signifies much more than a mere political alignment. It is a profound testament to the changing dynamics of global power and influence. For far too long, Africa has been marginalized, its land and resources exploited by foreign powers, with little regard for the well-being of its people. The legacy of colonialism, neo-colonialism, and systemic inequality continues to cast a long shadow over our continent. But now, with this unexpected alliance, the tides are beginning to turn in Africa's favor. What we are witnessing is not just a partnership between two individuals, but rather a convergence of ideas, strategies, and visions for Africa's future. One where African nations take their rightful place in the world, controlling their own destinies and safeguarding their lands. The notion that Africa's resources and lands should be reclaimed by its people is no longer a distant dream but a tangible reality, thanks to this unprecedented alliance. The historical context of Africa's struggle for sovereignty cannot be overstated. For centuries, our continent was treated as a mere resource reservoir for foreign powers, its land stripped, its peoples exploited, and its wealth extracted for the benefit of others. From the days of European colonization to the modern era of multinational corporations and foreign interventions, the pattern has been clear. Africa has been plundered, its voice silenced, and its land stolen. We have watched as the wealth of our continent has flowed out of our borders, while our people continue to face poverty, inequality, and displacement. But in this partnership, we see an opportunity to break that cycle. For the first time in recent history, the focus is on returning what was once taken, returning the land, the resources, and the power to the people of Africa. This is not just a political or economic deal. It is a moral imperative. The partnership between Trump and South Africa is a recognition of the injustices Africa has suffered and a clear step toward addressing them. South Africa has long been at the forefront of the battle for land reform, with its history of apartheid and systemic racism leaving deep scars on its land and people. The country has faced years of struggle in the fight for land justice, as millions of black South Africans continue to face the harsh realities of land dispossession. But now, with the support of a global ally, South Africa is in a position to accelerate its efforts to return land to the people. This partnership symbolizes not just a victory for South Africa, but for the entire African continent. It sets a powerful precedent that Africa's land is not up for negotiation or exploitation. It belongs to the African people. The partnership also represents a shift in the way Africa interacts with the world. For far too long, African countries have been caught in the web of foreign influence, dependent on aid and subject to the whims of global powers. The time has come for African nations to assert their independence, to take control of their resources, and to determine their own future. By joining forces with South Africa, Donald Trump, despite his controversial past, is signaling that Africa must be respected as a sovereign continent, capable of determining its own path and its own future. However, the alliance is not without its complexities. The legacy of colonialism and the global economic system still place significant obstacles in Africa's path. There are those who will question the motives behind such a partnership. Some may view Trump's involvement with suspicion, considering his previous policies and the divisive rhetoric that characterized his presidency. But it is crucial that we look beyond personalities and politics. This is a moment where Africa must focus on what truly matters: its sovereignty, its land, and its future. The real value of this partnership lies not in the personalities involved, but in the broader implications for Africa. This is an opportunity to forge stronger ties with the global community, to attract investment, and to create an environment where Africa's resources are harnessed for the benefit of its people. South Africa, in particular, stands to benefit significantly from this alliance. With the support of an international partner, it can accelerate its land reform process, ensuring that the land once taken from its people is restored. This is a victory not just for South Africa, but for all of Africa, as it sets a powerful example of what can be achieved when African nations take matters into their own hands. But this partnership is only the beginning. Africa must now come together to ensure that this new era of self-determination continues. The restoration of land is not enough. The African people must also reclaim their resources, their political power, and their future. This partnership is a symbol of what is possible when we work together and when we demand the respect and sovereignty that has long been denied to us. We must now take the next step, building the institutions, policies, and frameworks that will allow Africa to thrive. This means investing in education, infrastructure, and technology, and ensuring that the benefits of our resources are shared equitably among our people. It also means creating a robust legal framework that protects African land and resources from further exploitation. This partnership must serve as the catalyst for a broader movement, a movement where African nations no longer rely on foreign aid or external powers for their survival. Instead, we must invest in ourselves, build our economies, and ensure that the wealth of Africa stays in Africa. In conclusion, this historic partnership between former President Donald Trump and South Africa is a turning point for Africa's future. It represents a powerful step toward reclaiming Africa's land, resources, and sovereignty. It is a moment that should be embraced with hope, optimism, and a shared vision for a more prosperous, self-sufficient Africa. This is not just South Africa's fight, this is Africa's fight, and together we will reclaim what is rightfully ours. The time for Africa's renaissance has come. Let us rise united and take our place on the global stage. For centuries, Africa has borne the burden of exploitation, where foreign powers have treated its land and resources as nothing more than commodities to be extracted and used for their own gain. The history of colonization is one of theft, violence, and subjugation, a history that left deep scars on our continent. The rich soil, the bountiful forests, the vast mineral reserves, and the priceless energy resources, these have all been taken, often without a second thought for the well-being of the people who have lived on this land for generations. Africa has been plundered for its resources, while its people have been left to suffer, struggling with poverty, inequality, and the systematic denial of their rights. The exploitation of Africa's land and resources didn't stop with colonization. After many African nations gained independence, they faced the ongoing challenge of reclaiming their sovereignty. But even in the post-colonial era, Africa's land and resources continued to be controlled by multinational corporations and foreign interests, many of whom had no interest in developing the continent for the benefit of its people. Instead, these external forces extracted Africa's wealth, leaving behind environmental degradation and deep social inequities. Natural resources such as oil, gold, diamonds, and timber were taken to feed the industries of foreign countries, while African nations remained trapped in cycles of poverty. The story of Africa's land and resources is, therefore, not just one of historical theft, but of a continuing injustice that is deeply entrenched in global economic systems. Africa's vast natural wealth has always been seen as something for the taking, with little regard for the rights of the people who inhabit the land. This economic imbalance has fostered a situation where African nations have found themselves at the mercy of foreign powers, unable to fully capitalize on the resources beneath their feet. For many African countries, the promise of wealth from their own natural resources has been elusive. Instead, foreign corporations have benefited, leaving behind impoverished communities, environmental destruction, and unstable economies. This is where the significance of this partnership between Donald Trump and South Africa cannot be overstated. This alliance represents an opportunity to finally reverse this historical injustice. By focusing on the reclamation of African land and resources, this partnership seeks to empower African nations to take control of their futures. It is a recognition of Africa's rightful ownership of its wealth and a commitment to ensuring that these resources benefit the African people, not foreign corporations or governments. For far too long, the rich natural resources of Africa have been exploited by others. It is time for Africa to take the reins and ensure that its land and resources are used to build a prosperous future for its people. The restoration of control over Africa's resources begins with addressing the systemic issues that have allowed external forces to dominate the continent. One of the first steps in this process is to establish clear and effective legal frameworks that protect African land and resources from exploitation. These frameworks must ensure that the rights of local communities are respected and that foreign entities seeking to exploit the land do so under strict regulations that prioritize environmental sustainability, social equity, and the long-term well-being of African people. This legal infrastructure will be the foundation upon which the reclamation of Africa's resources will stand, ensuring that Africa's wealth is not extracted without accountability. But the fight for Africa's land and resources is not just about legal frameworks. It is also about developing the internal capacity of African nations to manage their wealth. This partnership, by aligning with South Africa's ongoing efforts to reform land ownership and resource management, aims to give African countries the tools they need to make the most of their resources. This means investing in education, infrastructure, and technology that will allow African nations to develop their industries and economies. Instead of relying on foreign corporations, African nations should be empowered to build their own industries, create jobs, and use their resources to fund development and social services. The resources of Africa should fuel the growth of Africa, not the profits of multinational corporations. This vision of self-sufficiency is crucial because Africa's wealth lies not just in the raw materials beneath its soil, but in its human capital, the knowledge, skills, and creativity of its people. The reclamation of land and resources must go hand in hand with the empowerment of African people. It must involve ensuring that the benefits of Africa's wealth are felt by every citizen, from the farmers who till the land, to the workers in the factories, to the young entrepreneurs starting businesses. This is about creating a system where the resources of Africa are used to uplift its people, to create a better future, and to reduce the inequality that has been perpetuated for so long. We must also consider the importance of protecting Africa's environment. While the continent's resources are vast, they are not infinite. The extraction and exploitation of natural resources must be done in a way that is sustainable and that preserves Africa's ecosystems for future generations. This means putting an end to the reckless exploitation of forests, rivers, and wildlife that has led to environmental degradation. We must embrace green technologies and renewable energy sources to ensure that Africa's resources are harnessed in ways that protect the environment and contribute to global efforts to combat climate change. Africa's reclamation of land and resources is also a political issue. For too long, African nations have been subjected to international pressures and geopolitical games that have prevented them from exercising their sovereignty. The relationship between African nations and global powers has often been one of subordination, but this partnership with South Africa is an opportunity to change that dynamic. It is a signal to the world that Africa will no longer allow its land and resources to be taken without consequence. Africa must stand firm in asserting its rights and ensure that its place in the world is one of respect, equality, and justice. In this process of reclaiming Africa's land and resources, we must also recognize the importance of solidarity. The struggles of South Africa are not isolated. They are part of a larger African struggle. The wealth of Africa belongs to all Africans, and the process of reclaiming it must involve a united front. Whether in South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, or the Democratic Republic of Congo, all African nations must work together to ensure that Africa's resources benefit its people, not foreign powers. Ultimately, the reclamation of Africa's land and resources is about empowerment. It is about breaking free from the chains of colonialism and neo-colonialism and taking control of our own destinies. This partnership between Donald Trump and South Africa is a significant step in that direction, but it is only a step. The real work lies ahead. Work that will require bold leadership, vision, and unity. Africa's time has come to take its place among the world's great powers, and it will do so by ensuring that its wealth benefits its people, strengthens its economies, and secures a future of prosperity and justice for all Africans. South Africa's fight for land justice is a story deeply rooted in the scars of apartheid and the enduring legacy of colonialism. For generations, the vast majority of South Africans, particularly the black population, were systematically dispossessed of their land. During apartheid, land was stolen from indigenous communities through oppressive policies that segregated people based on race, creating vast disparities in land ownership that persist to this day. The white minority controlled almost 90% of the land, while the black majority was relegated to small, arid areas with limited resources. This is a history that cannot be erased, a painful reality that continues to shape the struggles of millions of South Africans, even decades after the official end of apartheid. Since the fall of apartheid, land reform has been one of the most pressing issues in South Africa's post-apartheid agenda. The government, under the leadership of the African National Congress, ANC, recognized the need for land restitution and redistribution, pledging to return land to its rightful owners. Yet despite these efforts, the process has been slow, mired by political and economic challenges, resistance from the white landowners, and entrenched systemic barriers. The promises of land reform have often been undermined by the very forces that benefited from the historical theft of land: powerful landowners, multinational corporations, and international interests who have always been determined to maintain the status quo. This resistance has left marginalized communities, particularly rural black South Africans, trapped in poverty and inequality, unable to access the land they rightfully deserve. The land question has been further complicated by the failure of land reform programs to address the complex issues of compensation, governance, and capacity. Land redistribution efforts have often been hampered by bureaucratic inefficiencies and a lack of proper support for newly resettled farmers. The land given back to Black South Africans has in many cases been undeveloped, lacking the necessary infrastructure, irrigation, and access to markets for sustainable farming. As a result, many of the new landowners have struggled to make a living, reinforcing the cycle of poverty rather than breaking it. But this is where the partnership between South Africa and international forces, including the unexpected support from Donald Trump's administration, comes into play. For the first time, South Africa is receiving the international backing it needs to accelerate its land reform efforts. This support is crucial, not just in terms of the financial and technical resources it brings, but also as a signal that the global community recognizes the urgency and justice of South Africa's land struggle. This is not just a domestic issue, this is a matter of human rights and justice on a global scale. The support for South Africa's land reform is an acknowledgement of the long history of dispossession and a commitment to correcting the wrongs of the past. What makes this partnership significant is that it provides South Africa with the momentum it desperately needs to push forward with land redistribution. For too long, the process has been bogged down by political wrangling and opposition from powerful interests, both within South Africa and abroad. The international backing of this process, particularly from influential figures like Donald Trump, gives South Africa a renewed sense of legitimacy and authority in its pursuit of justice. It sends a clear message that the world supports South Africa's right to redistribute land and resources in a way that empowers its people and promotes economic justice. However, this support is not without its challenges. Land reform in South Africa is a highly contentious issue. The political landscape remains divided on how best to approach the process. While many advocate for land expropriation without compensation, others fear that this could lead to economic instability, land grabs, or further violence. There are concerns about the impact on South Africa's agricultural sector, which remains a vital part of its economy. These concerns, while legitimate, must not overshadow the moral imperative of correcting the injustices that have been done to the majority of South Africans. South Africa's land redistribution efforts must be guided by the principles of justice, equity, and sustainability. This requires a balanced approach, one that takes into account the needs of marginalized communities, while ensuring that the process does not destabilize the country's economy or lead to further division. In addition to land redistribution, the partnership with international allies must also focus on supporting the broader economic development of Black South Africans. Land alone will not lift people out of poverty. Access to education, healthcare, jobs, and markets is also essential for creating sustainable livelihoods. South Africa must not only focus on giving people land, but also on empowering them with the skills, resources, and infrastructure needed to make the land productive. This means investing in rural development, providing access to finance and technical assistance, and creating policies that foster inclusive economic growth. The marginalization of Black South Africans in the agricultural sector must be addressed through comprehensive land reform policies that give people not just land but the tools to succeed. There must be a commitment to creating a thriving agricultural sector that is owned and operated by Black South Africans, one that serves as a foundation for broader economic growth. To do this, the government must partner with international stakeholders who are willing to invest in the success of South Africa's land reform agenda. This includes ensuring that farmers have access to modern farming techniques, irrigation systems, and transport networks that can connect them to markets. The government must also take a proactive role in facilitating access to capital for new landowners so they can invest in equipment and infrastructure to make their land productive. In addition to practical support, the moral and political backing of international partners like Donald Trump is vital in challenging the entrenched interests that have long stood in the way of land reform. It gives South Africa the strength to confront powerful landowners and international corporations who have sought to undermine the land redistribution process for their own benefit. This support allows South Africa to negotiate from a position of strength and ensure that the land reform process is not hijacked by powerful elites who seek to maintain the status quo. Ultimately, South Africa's struggle for land justice is a microcosm of Africa's broader struggle for self-determination and sovereignty. Land is not just a commodity, it is a symbol of dignity, identity, and power. The history of land dispossession in South Africa reflects a broader history of exploitation and inequality that continues to affect much of the African continent. The struggle for land justice is therefore a struggle for the future of Africa, for the empowerment of its people, and for the restoration of its dignity. This partnership between South Africa and international allies, including Donald Trump, represents a crucial opportunity to break the chains of colonialism and apartheid. It is an opportunity to rebuild South Africa on a foundation of justice, equality, and opportunity. The journey ahead will not be easy, but with international support and a clear commitment to justice, South Africa can pave the way for a future where the land and resources of the country are used to uplift its people, promote economic development, and heal the wounds of the past. For too long, Africa has been marginalized, often reduced to a mere spectator in global affairs, its voice drowned out by powerful foreign interests and geopolitical maneuvering. The continent has been subjected to external control, whether through colonialism, economic dependency, or the manipulation of its resources. Africa's potential has been stifled by a history of exploitation and misrepresentation, and its people have been denied the opportunity to determine their own destiny. But the moment we find ourselves in today, marked by the unexpected alliance between South Africa and international forces, like former President Donald Trump, signals a profound shift. This partnership, a symbol of Africa's rising influence, is an undeniable indicator that the era of passivity is over. Africa is stepping up, asserting its rightful place on the global stage, and demanding the respect and recognition it deserves as a powerful and independent force. What we are witnessing today is not just an alliance between two governments, it is the crystallization of a larger narrative, one where Africa is no longer a continent simply subjected to the whims of global powers, but rather a continent that is actively shaping its future. Africa's rich natural resources, its vibrant culture, and its ever-growing economic and political influence are not to be taken lightly anymore. This is a continent that has learned from its past, adapted to the challenges it faces, and is now poised to take control of its trajectory. For too long, we have been pushed to the margins, told that we were incapable of making decisions for ourselves, that we were dependent on external powers for aid, guidance, and growth. But now, Africa is reclaiming its power. The alliance between South Africa and the international partners who are now backing its land reform efforts is a perfect example of how the continent is shifting its role in the global system. It is not simply about land restitution or resource control. Though these are critical issues, it is about asserting sovereignty, about Africa choosing its path forward without external interference. The support South Africa is receiving, particularly from high-profile global figures, sends a clear message that Africa's future will no longer be dictated by external actors, but by Africans themselves. This is the beginning of a new era where African nations are not only recognized for their natural wealth, but for their ability to lead and innovate, to create partnerships that serve their own interests and those of the global community. As Africa's influence grows, so too does its voice in international negotiations, from trade to climate change, security to technology. No longer can the global community ignore the fact that Africa is home to some of the world's largest economies, fastest growing populations, and most valuable resources. Africa's development is no longer just about extracting its wealth. It is about leveraging that wealth to create sustainable growth, reduce poverty, and build institutions that serve the interests of its people. This shift has the potential to reframe global power dynamics, challenging the old guard and pushing for a more balanced, equitable world order. This is the power of self-determination. No longer will Africa be asked to negotiate its future based on the terms of foreign powers. We are taking the reins of our own future, and with this newfound agency, Africa is beginning to demand respect and recognition as a global player. This means African nations will no longer be satisfied with being on the receiving end of aid and assistance. Rather, Africa is looking to build mutually beneficial relationships, to enter into partnerships that are not exploitative, but rooted in respect, collaboration, and shared prosperity. African countries are beginning to understand that they have the ability not only to determine their future, but also to shape the global discourse around key issues such as development, climate change, and security. A continent of over 1.4 billion people, with immense cultural, geographical, and political diversity, Africa now finds itself at a crossroads. With the backing of international partners, the opportunity is before us to build a truly African-led future, one where the decisions we make are for the benefit of our people, not dictated by outside forces. The partnership with South Africa is just the beginning of what could become a broader movement, one where African nations come together to ensure that they have a seat at the table in every major global decision-making process. The ability of African nations to assert themselves on the global stage is not just about economics, it's about having a voice in global governance. African countries have for too long been excluded from meaningful participation in global decision-making bodies, such as the United Nations Security Council or international economic institutions. But now, with the rising economic power of countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and others, the need for African representation in global governance is more urgent than ever. Africa's rising influence is not just about increasing its economic clout, it is about demanding a fairer, more inclusive international order. No longer will Africa be marginalized or excluded from discussions about climate change, security, or trade. Instead, African nations are taking their place alongside the world's most powerful players, ensuring that their voices are heard and their interests represented. Africa's rising influence is also linked to its growing political maturity. As more and more African countries strengthen their democratic institutions and their ability to resolve conflicts peacefully, the continent's role as a beacon of stability and peace becomes even more pronounced. The successes of the African Union and regional organizations like ECOWAS and SADC in mediating conflicts and promoting peace across the continent are evidence of Africa's capacity for leadership. As African nations come together to address common challenges, they are increasingly seen as active players in shaping global security and peace. Furthermore, Africa's youth, the continent's most abundant resource, represents a powerful force for the future. With a median age of just 19, Africa is home to the youngest population in the world. This demographic is eager to build, innovate, and lead. It is a generation that understands the value of education, technology, and entrepreneurship. It is a generation that is not content with being passive. They are demanding opportunities to drive Africa's future. This youth movement is a crucial element of Africa's rising influence, as young people across the continent are increasingly playing a leading role in political, social, and economic spheres. In the past, Africa has been a continent defined by external interests, but the future of Africa is now defined by Africa itself. This partnership between South Africa and international allies is a concrete step toward achieving a world where Africa is no longer the object of foreign influence, but a true subject of global importance. Africa is no longer the passive actor it once was. It is asserting its rights, its sovereignty, and its place in the global order. The time has come for Africa to step into its rightful role as a leader in the international community, and the world is beginning to recognize that Africa is rising, and it is ready to take its place as an equal among the world's great powers. The partnership between South Africa and international forces, including former President Donald Trump, may initially appear unexpected, especially when viewed through the lens of political ideologies. After all, we often expect the world to be divided along traditional political lines: liberal versus conservative, capitalist versus socialist, East versus West. But this alliance proves that the future of Africa transcends such divisions. It reminds us that Africa's progress is about more than political affiliations, more than ideological disagreements, and more than the narrow interests of any one country or group. It is about a shared vision for the continent's future, one where Africa is empowered to reclaim its land, resources, and dignity, free from external exploitation and intervention. In that context, it becomes clear that the continent's success hinges on the ability to build alliances that prioritize Africa's needs and aspirations above all else. This partnership represents the kind of pragmatism that Africa must embrace as it moves towards self-sufficiency. Political differences have often been a source of division, not just within African countries, but across the continent. For decades, leaders in Africa have been caught in the web of ideological battles that at times detracted from the continent's most urgent needs: economic development, social justice, and the restoration of African sovereignty. While these political divides were understandable in the context of a world shaped by the Cold War and the global struggle for ideological dominance, they are less relevant today. In an interconnected world where the issues facing Africa, climate change, poverty, inequality, and conflict, are global in nature, it is essential for Africa to move beyond the limitations of old political distinctions. Africa's progress will not be determined by the political color of its allies, but by the actions they take to support its people. Political ideologies, in the grand scheme of Africa's liberation and development, must not be allowed to stand in the way of progress. This partnership between South Africa and international supporters is proof of this principle. Regardless of political differences, these parties have come together because they recognize that Africa's future depends on supporting its people's right to self-determination and sustainable growth. Whether from the left or the right, the underlying message is clear: Africa's future must be built on its own terms, with its own people at the helm of the process. The African diaspora and allies across the world are increasingly supporting this vision, recognizing that Africa's success benefits all of humanity. It is an investment not just in Africa, but in the broader global community. The past mistakes of the international community cannot be ignored. For centuries, Africa was treated as a source of raw materials to fuel the industrialization of Europe, the Americas, and parts of Asia, while its people were enslaved, exploited, and robbed of their heritage. Decades after colonization, Africa still grapples with the scars of this history. But rather than remaining in the shadows of that painful past, Africa must use these experiences as a catalyst for change. The progress of the continent should not be slowed by past grievances, nor should political differences or past animosities limit the scope of alliances it can build today. This is not to say that Africa should forget its history, but rather that it should leverage the lessons of the past to ensure that the future is shaped by collective, forward-thinking action. This approach to unity is especially important in light of Africa's economic needs. The continent's wealth and natural resources, whether oil, minerals, or agricultural produce, has long been its curse, rather than its blessing. For too long, foreign powers have extracted Africa's resources, enriching themselves, while leaving behind economic underdevelopment, corruption, and social inequality. The time has come for a fundamental shift. It is no longer enough for African nations to depend on foreign aid or charity. The task now is to empower African countries to create sustainable economies by forging partnerships that prioritize long-term growth over short-term gains. Whether the partners in these alliances are from the political left or right, their support will be judged by how it contributes to Africa's self-sufficiency, economic independence, and security. This means that the focus of Africa's progress must shift from mere political rhetoric to tangible, actionable steps. The partnership between South Africa and international supporters serves as a reminder that when it comes to Africa's future, the politics of the past should not hold the continent hostage. The goal must be clear: economic empowerment, land restitution, access to resources, and the establishment of a fair global order that recognizes the sovereignty and value of African nations. Political differences will always exist, but these should not prevent African leaders from making strategic decisions that benefit the continent as a whole. Africa must prioritize collective success, not only for today but also for the future generations who will inherit the work done in this moment. Unity for progress also means breaking away from the limitations imposed by a global system that has historically sidelined Africa's contributions. Whether in trade, technology, or diplomacy, African countries have often been denied an equal seat at the table. This alliance between South Africa and international players, particularly those willing to engage in serious conversations about land restitution and economic reforms, is a breakthrough moment. It is a step towards ensuring that Africa's needs are not only heard, but acted upon. As African nations increasingly collaborate with those who are willing to support the continent's self-sufficiency, they are building the foundation for long-lasting partnerships that will benefit everyone involved. Perhaps one of the most crucial lessons to be learned from this partnership is that Africa's problems cannot be solved by Africa alone. The challenges that Africa faces, poverty, inequality, climate change are global in nature. No single nation, no matter how powerful, can solve these issues on its own. Africa must engage with the international community, but on its own terms. The fact that South Africa has been able to form an alliance with international supporters, regardless of their political ideologies, shows that Africa is willing to engage in strategic partnerships that serve its interests. This pragmatic approach, which focuses on the concrete needs of the African people, will be key to the continent's future success. This is not to suggest that Africa should blindly follow the dictates of others. Africa's self-determination is paramount, and its leaders must remain vigilant against exploitation or manipulation. However, the willingness to build alliances with those who share Africa's commitment to justice, equity, and development is a necessary step toward progress. This is the essence of unity for progress, putting aside ideological differences to focus on the concrete issues that matter most to the people of Africa. It is about recognizing that the success of the continent is more important than any political divide. In the end, the success of Africa will depend on the collective efforts of its people, its leaders, and its allies. Political differences should not prevent Africa from moving forward, from forging alliances that promote sustainable development, restore justice, and bring about prosperity for all Africans. This partnership between South Africa and international players is a powerful example of what can be achieved when Africa's leaders take bold steps to correct past wrongs and unite for a common purpose. The future of Africa depends on its ability to form alliances based on shared values of justice, equity, and mutual respect. Africa stands at the precipice of a transformative moment. After centuries of exploitation, colonization, and systemic oppression, the winds of change are sweeping across the continent. This is a time for all Africans, whether they live on the continent or in the diaspora, to unite, to take action, and to reclaim not just our land, but our dignity, our sovereignty, and our future. The alliance between South Africa and international players, particularly the historic steps being taken towards land restitution and economic empowerment, offers us a unique opportunity to rise above the challenges that have held us back for so long. The future is now ours to shape, and it is a future that must be built on the principles of unity, justice, and self-determination. The time has come for Africa to stop waiting for permission from others to claim its rightful place in the world. We have been told for too long that we are not ready, not capable, or not strong enough to lead our own destiny. This false narrative has been imposed upon us by external forces who, for their own benefit, have sought to keep Africa fragmented and dependent. But we know the truth. Africa is rich in resources, in talent, and in spirit. We have the strength, the intellect, and the resilience to not only meet the challenges we face, but to transcend them. This moment is our opportunity to prove that Africa's time has come, that we no longer accept the status quo, and that we are ready to take our place among the world's leading powers. We must begin by acknowledging that unity is the key to our success. Africa has long been divided by borders drawn by colonial powers, divided by ethnic differences, and divided by political ideologies. But the very forces that sought to fragment us have only served to weaken us. To rise, we must set aside our divisions and embrace a common purpose. Africa's strength lies in its diversity, but our true power comes from our ability to come together, to focus on our shared interests, and to work collectively toward a future where every African, no matter where they are from, has the opportunity to thrive. Unity is not just a noble idea, it is a practical necessity. We cannot afford to remain divided any longer, especially at a time when the world is watching and the opportunities for progress are within reach. The question now is how we will unite and what that unity will look like in practice. It starts with acknowledging that the struggles of any one African nation are the struggles of all of us. When South Africa fights for land restitution, it is not just a South African issue, it is an African issue. When Nigeria struggles with corruption and economic inequality, it is not just a Nigerian issue, it is an African issue. Every challenge faced by one African country reverberates across the entire continent because we are bound together by our shared history and collective future. Our enemies, those who seek to exploit, divide, and undermine us, are the same, and so must our response be unified. This unity must be grounded in a shared vision for Africa's future. It is a vision of economic independence where African nations no longer rely on foreign aid, but instead build sustainable economies that benefit their people. It is a vision of political sovereignty where African nations make decisions for themselves, free from the interference of external powers. It is a vision of cultural pride where African identities are celebrated, where our history is reclaimed, and where our voices are heard on the global stage. It is a vision of social justice where no African is left behind, where our young people are empowered with education and opportunity, and where our elders are respected and cared for. This is the Africa we are working toward, a united, prosperous, and self-governing continent. But unity alone will not be enough. We must take action. Unity without action is merely a dream, a hope without substance. It is time to move beyond rhetoric and put our words into practice. Africa must now focus on building the systems, institutions, and infrastructure that will make our vision a reality. Land reform, economic empowerment, and self-governance must be the cornerstones of this movement. The fight for land restitution in South Africa is just one example of the larger struggle for control over Africa's resources. The time for Africa to regain ownership of its land, its minerals, and its natural wealth is long overdue. But land alone is not enough. We must ensure that this wealth is harnessed in ways that serve the needs of our people. We need to build industries, invest in education, and create markets that are driven by African enterprises. We must invest in agriculture, renewable energy, and technology, not just to improve our own livelihoods, but to create opportunities for trade and collaboration within Africa and with the global community. But action is not only about economic development, it is also about political will. African governments must rise to the occasion, showing the courage to make bold decisions that prioritize the interests of their people over the interests of external powers or elites. This means fighting corruption, building transparent and accountable institutions, and creating policies that foster inclusivity and fairness. It also means standing up for Africa's place in the world, whether that's in global trade negotiations, climate change discussions, or international diplomatic relations. Africa has long been sidelined in these discussions, but that time is ending. We must insist on a seat at the table, and not just as recipients of aid or passive participants in global decisions, but as active contributors to solutions. The youth of Africa must also be at the forefront of this movement. The continent's young people represent not only its greatest challenge, but also its greatest opportunity. With a median age of just 19, Africa has the youngest population in the world. This is a demographic that is hungry for change, that is ready to lead, and that is determined to shape Africa's future. Our young people are innovative, creative, and tech-savvy. They are not waiting for the old systems to change. They are building new ones. As they demand jobs, education, and opportunities, they are also demanding a stake in the future of Africa. This is a generation that will not sit idly by as the world changes around them. They are ready to lead the charge for Africa's economic and political transformation. Finally, this call for African unity and action is not just for governments or leaders. It is a call to each and every African, no matter where they are in the world, to play their part. Whether you are an entrepreneur building a business, a teacher inspiring young minds, a doctor serving your community, or a student working to gain the skills you need for the future, you are part of this movement. We all have a role to play in the African Renaissance. It is only through collective action, through the strength of millions of individuals working together, that we will achieve the Africa we dream of. Africa is ready to rise. The opportunities before us are immense, and with unity, vision, and action, we can transform the future of our continent. The world is watching, but it is our actions that will define us. This is our time, and together we will shape Africa's destiny. We must seize the moment and take bold, decisive steps to build a future of prosperity, dignity, and self-governance for all Africans. It is time to rise together.